Hey everyone, and welcome to this video. Today I'm going to be going over squatting development for CrossFit athletes, and I'm going to give you 3 examples of how I've done this in the past and how I generally do it with the athletes that I work with. I'm going to be going over what I would do for a beginner athlete, so someone just getting into competing in CrossFit. Maybe they've done a bit of training and classes beforehand. I'm then going to talk about someone who is more of an intermediate athlete. So this is someone who's starting to compete. Maybe they would be trying to make a push for what used to be quarterfinals. And if they were to do a class, this person would most likely be top of the class, if not, sort of the best amongst the members that you would find in a CrossFit box. And then I'm going to be looking at an advanced athlete. And this is the example I'm actually going to be using is someone who is sort of pushing for high places in the old quarterfinals, competes regularly at local competitions, and then also will travel to bigger competitions out of country 1 or 2 times per year as well. Let's look at squatting demands for CrossFit. What we're going to look at right now is the strength squatting demands. So we're not necessarily looking for, sorry, this is bugging me for some reason. We're not necessarily looking at squatting demands as it pertains to movements like wall balls or thrusters or something that's involved in conditioning. We're going to be looking at it from a strength building perspective. So for the back squat, generally speaking, the back squat is going to be the easiest way to stress the squatting pattern. You are able to lift the most amount of weight through the back squat than you are through other variations of the squat. Just due to the bar placement, you're able to increase the amount of weight that you're moving through that pattern. For example, on the front squat, you're going to be limited by your front rack position and the posture that you're maintaining through there, so you're not necessarily able to hit as heavy weights. So the back squat lends itself to training in various certain ways, which you might not be able to see through other types of squatting. So one thing that you're able to do with the back squat is you're able to go for higher reps and you're able to go for heavier weights and it just not take as much out of the body, which is something that we can start to use within the training, and you'll see how I do that. So the back squat is mainly a training tool, but it is really important as a beginner and as an intermediate athlete to try and get that number up as high as possible. Obviously not, overdoing it. A lot of athletes do that, but just trying to make sure that you're getting as much strength gains from that as possible so that it translates into other types of squatting and into your Olympic weightlifting. Now, for the front squat is going to be a lot more of a sport-specific movement, and it's very important that we're maintaining a certain technique within the front squat and how we train it. It's very easy to go a bit too heavy and maybe we end up losing our positions. So for the front squat, we want to make sure that we stay nice and upright, we keep as much of a full grip on the front rack as possible, and that we're maintaining really good posture as we're coming out of the squat, and we're not necessarily collapsing through the upper body, because that would definitely translate into things like missing cleans or not necessarily having as strong as dipper drive in the jerk. So for a beginner, I would recommend using something which is very similar to the linear progression that you would see through starting strength. And in the linear progression in starting strength, that program is a lot more aimed towards just basic barbell strength training and also powerlifting, but they have a squat frequency of 3 times per week. Whereas I would recommend, because of all of the things that you're trying to do in CrossFit, the frequency of your squatting should be 2 times per week, and you should do back squats on one day, and then you should do front squats on another day. And for the back squats, I would use the same prescription as they use for the linear progression in starting strength, and that's 3 sets of 5 reps, same weight across, and you would start around 65 to 70%, and then every single exposure you would try to add 5 kilos to the lift, or 10 pounds, and then when that starts to slow down, you could then start to add 2.5 kilos, or 5 pounds. And the goal is to basically ride that out for as long as possible. If you do not, for example, hit the weights, you might regress that, and you might just try to repeat the previous week's work. And then on the next week, you could try to make another shot at that new weight. And I think it's around about, say, 2 weeks of not being able to progress. Usually it means that you need to either create a bit more, make sure the athlete's rested. So it could be just taking an easier week, or it just could be, bringing it down to 3 sets of 3 reps. So you're reducing the reps and you're allowing that progress curve to keep going, because the goal is to increase the weights week on week, and the longer you can do that, the more sort of productive training that you're going to be able to get, and you're able to extend out that progress curve for as long as possible. Now, what happens quite often though is you'll have people jump onto a program which has, some form of accumulation, intensification, realization, right? So they might be following a traditional squatting program from a weightlifting block or from a powerlifting program. And the issue with that is that usually the athlete isn't at that stage yet. Like, they can probably, when they're in their beginner phase, with a bit of patience, with a bit of diligence, they can just play out that linear progression for quite a while. It just takes a little bit of moving back and forth on occasion, and you can get really, really strong doing that. So you may have noticed that I've just copied over the same prescription week on week for this beginner athlete, because I would recommend that you're not trying to increase the volume. You're just applying a little bit more training stress per week. That application of increased training stress every single week, and the fact that they are beginner, usually means that they're going to be getting stronger. So that's the back squat, and I would use the back squat, linear progression, get that number as high as possible. For the front squat, however, I would start to look at basically trying to challenge the positions a little bit more, use a bit of a lighter weight, and really try to adopt some good technique. Now, just a note, I have used percentages on both of these prescriptions, but it could be that the athlete doesn't know what their best weights are. And in that case, it usually just means you have to play around with the weights for, make a good educated guess. Nothing too crazy, have just asking a few questions with the athlete, you can usually figure things out. But in that situation, you figure it out, and then after maybe 2-3 weeks, you usually fall into a good intensity range to be working at, and then you can move from there. So for the beginner in the front squat, I would use something like a 10-minute EMOM, 2 to 3 reps, 65 to 75%. So this should be something where they're able to maintain good technique. And then honestly, I wouldn't change the prescription too much, but it might just be a case of moving some things around. So for the following week, it could be you're going to do a 10-minute EMOM, but this time you're going to be working 3 reps. And also for this piece here, should be quite low stakes. So sorry, I changed the wrong one. So this shouldn't be a training session where the athlete is having to get amped up or anything like that. Most likely they would have finished some Olympic weightlifting, and then they're going into some front squats. It might take them 1 or 2 sets to warm up to that weight, or not even to warm up to that weight, just to get the movement going, and then they should be ready to go from there. So moving into the intermediate athlete, we would potentially go up to a squatting volume of 3 times per week. But what we would do is we would play this out a little bit more like the Texas method. Okay, so the Texas method is a squatting program. It can be used also for other lifts, but this is a program which was developed by weightlifting coach Glenn Pendlay, and it's something which is more of an intermediate program when that linear progression stops working as well. And the basis of this program is that you have a volume day, you have a lighter day, and then you have a intensity day. So you're hitting the squat from 3 different angles here, and it's something which provides a lot of flexibility to play around with, which is really good. And I think that that's quite important for programming for CrossFit athletes, because you can, when you start to understand the principles behind these programs, you can just start to extract that important bit rather than trying to actually run these programs alongside all the other stuff in CrossFit, which I think is a recipe for disaster. So for the intermediate program, the Monday would be the Monday would be devoted towards volume. So we would use the back squat for that, because the front squat is not a good candidate for training at volume. And you'll notice that the prescription is pretty much the same as what it was for the beginner athlete. Now, moving on to the second day. On the second day, you would have your front squats. And for this, it would be 5 sets, 3 reps. And for your intensity, my recommendation would be to be working around something like, I would say for this would be something like 60 to 70%. And the reason why I say 60 to 70% is because you have all of this other squatting going on, you want to go a little bit lighter here, and you just want to use this session just to get some reps in the legs. Now you could make this 3 sets, you could add some pauses in here, you could mix it up a little bit, but you don't necessarily want to be going too heavy on this, because you already have 2 tougher squatting sessions to handle during the week. So this is quite well placed on the Wednesday or the 3rd day of training, usually when you're a bit more tired. And then you have a rest day, and then you move into the intensity day, and that would be building up to a 5 rep max on the back squat. And the goal here would be trying to work towards a new 5 rep max each single week. And similar to the linear progression that we've had with the beginner athlete, and then also on the volume day, if, say, for example, you start to feel like you're not able to hit those weights for a 5 rep max, you could go down to a 4 rep max, or you could go down to a 3 rep max and such. The main goal here is essentially to extend what was going on when you were a beginner, and then allow that to continue with, like, as you're an intermediate athlete, but just adding in some different types of stimulus to allow you to keep progressing. Because most likely you're going to need a bit more volume than you were when you're a beginner, and you're also going to need some more touches on intensity and practice at heavier weights. So what this does is you start off at a point which sets you up for a long runway of progress to, again, try and increase that number throughout this sort of phase of your training. My recommendation is that if you do start to increase the volume somewhere, I wouldn't change other things going on in other places. So if you're changing elements of the program to either hit more intensity or more volume, or considerably more intensity on your intensity day, for the volume day, for the light day and the intensity day, keep those static. Don't change those. Okay? The more things you change within a program, the more that you're unable to identify what is and what isn't working. So if you change one thing at a time, you know what the new input was, and you can see how the results and the athlete responds to that. And then you're able to make better decision making week on week. And that's a big part of programming. Don't change too. This works a lot better with a dynamic form of programming where you're able to change things as you go, rather than just, okay, we're going to create a 6-week cycle and you're going to do this for 2 weeks, this for 2 weeks, this for 2 weeks. You don't necessarily know if the athlete is able to keep progressing with the things they're doing on week 1, why change it, right? If the athlete is moving in the right direction, they're progressing and they're able to keep going with that, you want to continue with that momentum. So you don't necessarily want to get ahead of the athlete and create progression when they can still get better and elicit a better training response. So that's the intermediate athlete. We're trying to continue what we're doing with the beginner athlete. We're just extending that now, and we're just still trying to increase the max weight but we're giving them a few more things to help them along the way to be able to do that. So for the advanced athlete, this is going to be someone who they will be experiencing new PRs not very often. And in this situation, the main thing you're going to be looking at is what the individual really needs from the squat. So if the athlete needs to increase their absolute strength, if that's the thing that holds them back, if say, for example, they have a very good technique in their weightlifting, but the thing that holds them back from snatching and clean and jerking more weight is they feel the bars heavy off the floor. They're not able to stand up their cleans as well. They feel like the bar sort of pushes them down as they go into a dip and drive for the jerk. If they start to have these types of things going on in their lifting, they need to work on their absolute strength. And then in that situation, my suggestion is to sort of carry on doing what you're doing with the intermediate athlete, and you might be just cycling through this type of stuff a little bit more often. So you might be just working through 4 weeks of a setup where you're building the volume, building the intensity, and then you're having a week off, and then you're going back to it. And what you can do is you can use a bit of a step progression. So let's say, for example, week 1, week 2, week 3, you're increasing each time. Week 4, you have an easier week. And then in week 1 of the new phase, you would just go back to week 3. And then you would just try to start that progression on and continue it on. And you're just going, say, 3 up, 1 down, 3 up, 1 down, like so. And what that does is it just... it gives the athlete sometimes something to work towards as well. So if they're if they know they've got 3 weeks of hard training on their squat, but then in the 4th week, they're going to take a bit of an easier week, that can be helpful. That can give them something to work towards, and it can keep them pretty engaged. So now we're going to look at this athlete here for the advanced. And like I said, we're looking at really what is it that they need. And in this situation, the athlete, I did actually use this with an athlete I worked with. They needed to work on their squatting mechanics. They needed a bit more of an upright squat. We wanted to keep the hips down. We didn't want those hips to rise up as quickly. And in this situation, we're using 3 variations of the squat per week. So we have a safety squat bar squat, which is going to be more of a combination of the front squat and back squat. It allows you to lift a bit heavier than front squat, but it keeps you a bit more upright than the back squat. Then on the middle day, we used a paused front squat followed by a regular front squat. So there we're getting a bit more focus on the positions in that deep front squat. And then we're following that up with a rep performed at regular weight. So we're learning how to get out of that position dynamically. And then for the intensity day, or for the harder session, this would alternate weekly. So 1 week it would be a back squat, 1 week it would be a front squat. And we wouldn't be trying to go for like rep maxes or anything like that. But what we would be doing is working 3 sets, 3 reps, so pretty low volume. But we'd be working around 1 to 2 reps in reserve. And this is quite high intensity, especially for an athlete at this stage. It would take a while for them, for example, to be able to build up to these weights. And they would be going for 2, probably 3 minutes, maybe 4 minutes if they chat too much to their friends. Rest between rounds as well, okay? So there we have 3 variations of the squat. The first 2 variations, we're trying to get a bit more volume on the safety squat bar. On the paused front squat and the regular front squat, we're trying to get a little bit more of a lighter stimulus, a little bit more focus on the positions and being dynamic. And then we have a heavier stimulus on the heavy day, and for that we're alternating between the front and the back squat, which is I think something which you can do to elongate that progress. So again, there's a sort of, for the advanced athlete, you might be trying to challenge a number of different things within their squatting, but the background goal is that you do want to continue for them to put weight on the bar, get heavier front squats, heavier back squats. And rather than just having the back squat every single week and carrying on in that fashion, alternating between a back squat and a front squat can actually just give you a bit more rest on a week between, so that you can go back to that squatting variation and you can try to beat your previous scores. And like I said, with the beginner moving into intermediate, what you're trying to do is you're just trying to give them a couple more tools to then be able to push that progress further. So for a beginner, we keep it simple. It's almost like the exposure of squatting and squatting regularly and doing, training well. That's the thing that gets them stronger. For the intermediate athlete, it now becomes about, okay, we need to give them a little bit more volume. We need to give them a little bit more intensity. We might need to mix up the movements we're using a little bit, and that's something which is going to increase their strength. And then for the advanced athlete, you're really getting into what it is they need as an individual. Okay, is it the positions that are lacking? Do we actually need to get stronger in the back squat? Is that something which is going to translate into CrossFit performance? Or is it something which is going to, and this happens quite often, it's just too much of a stressful training stimulus, and it means that you're not able to put that training stimulus in other places. For the advanced athlete, I would say the prescription stays a little bit more the same, training block to training block. And what the goal is to try and find the right stimulus, and then essentially each week the athlete will know how to train and know how to approach these training progressions in order to be able to improve. But you're not necessarily trying to increase the performance week on week. You're not trying to push the performance, but what you are trying to do is you're trying to pull the performance. So you are trying to pull up the bottom or pull up the floor to raise the ceiling. So if for the advanced athletes, I generally keep the strength progressions that I use for them very similar week to week. I might add in a bit of scope for them to increase here or there, but generally speaking, their strength numbers and things like that, they're not increasing week on week. They're not getting that much stronger as quickly as a beginner athlete is. So therefore, I go for this approach where the goal is to find the right stimulus and then continually apply that right stimulus to their training. Anyway, so that's half an hour of me talking about squatting. I really hope that you enjoyed that. And yeah, if you've got any questions or anything that you that didn't make sense in this video, or if you have questions about how it might apply to you or something like that, drop them in the comments. I'll respond to them, and yeah, we can make sure that this video is as useful as it can be for you. All right, thank you.